Hey class, so before you start watching this video, you should have already made all your measurements on your sheet of paper. There's a separate document that you can check out my sheet of paper if you want to see the measurements that I made. Once you've done all that, you should open up an Excel spreadsheet. I've already put in some headings here, so you can do that first. And then what I want to do is I'm going to start populating this. So this column here called interval, that's literally just a counting number. So between which dots are you counting? So the first measurement I made, I'm just going to call that interval 1. Now if you look at my sheet of paper, I made 30 total measurements, so I'm going to have 30 total intervals. I could just write out 1 through 30 going down here, but let's do some basic equations in Excel just to speed things up. So in this right here, what I'm going to do in this cell, whenever I want to use an equation, I always press the equals. Then I'm going to click on the cell that I want to do. So this 1 here, I want to use that. So I just left click on it and it'll populate the formula bar with that cell number, A2. Then to complete my formula, I'm just going to add 1 to that because I want this cell to read 2. And obviously 1 plus 1 is 2. Now I don't have to keep on doing that. How I can apply that formula is I just scroll over to the right hand corner until I see that black cross. I'm going to left click and hold down, and I'm going to scroll for as long as I want to apply that. I know that I'm going to want to go down to 31 here, and look at that. I have all my intervals. Now I always like to center everything, so I'm just going to go up to my toolbar here, hit the center, and center that. Now the only thing that you're going to have to manually input are all of your distances. My first distance was 1.8 millimeters, as you can see from my sheet that I'm posting. So I'm going to input in 1.8. My next one was 2.8. And I'm going to have to do this for all 30. For some reason this isn't working right now. Click on the formula bar. Oh, is my program frozen? Here we go, unfrozen, 2.8. Now I've actually already done this. You would have seen me flip to another screen. That's where I've completed everything we want to do. So to save some time, I'm just going to highlight this whole column. Sorry, I guess that second number was 2.5. I'm just going to Control C and Control V over. Now obviously you guys can't do this. You're going to have to hand enter in all of these values for what you measured. But those were all of the hand measurements that I made with my ruler. So now that I've populated my distance traveled during intervals, I want to do this total time elapsed. Now this is the total amount of time that has elapsed since the timer started. So during this first interval, we know because the spark timer was set to 30 Hertz that 1/30th of a second will have elapsed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say equals, well, the first interval, and then I'm going to multiply that quantity by 1 divided by 30, or 1/30th of a second. And what we should see is the total time that's elapsed. Now when I click on this little black cross here, what it's going to do is populate these. Now if I was to click on this to see the formula, what it did was it multiplied the new interval 2, because 2 intervals have elapsed, and each interval is 1/30th of a second, so I get the total time that's elapsed here. Let's go in the bottom right hand corner and apply this to everything, and we'll see we can save ourselves a ton of time. Now we get some weird rounding issues right here, and what we want to do is, let's say, round to 3 significant digits. So I'm going to highlight this whole column, and then you'll see these up here. decrease decimal, increase decimal. Now what we can do is we can get all of these to the same precision, to 3 significant digits. So I'm just going to click on it once, it's set it like this, and then I'm just going to decrease the decimal until I get to 3 sig digs. And this looks a lot nicer. And to the same precision, which is what we want. Centered, we have our total time elapsed. Now for our total distance traveled, what we want to do is we just want to start adding up these totals. So what we can do is we can say that this is equal to, well, this guy right here. Okay, and that's what's going to happen. Now, so that we can get our cumulative totals, is we want to make sure that it's adding what happened previously, right here 1.8, to what happened currently, 2.5. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say equals, well, this 1.8 plus 2.5. And we're going to see that this should come out to 4.3. Now, if I was to highlight this next one, we'll see it says 7.5 because the formula that it used was 4.3 plus 3.2. And then we can populate all of this. Bang. So we see in total that it traveled 309 millimeters, or about 30 centimeters. All right, now we can actually start doing some graphing. So we're always going to go to this insert button here, and every single graph you'll ever do in physics is called an XY scatter plot. It's these little dots right here. If you have an older version of Excel, you'll just see for graphs or charts it's called XY scatter plot. And I'm just going to click on an empty cell and click on that. We'll see we want to scatter. You're always going to do this type of graph in physics. There's nothing here because it doesn't know what data to populate it with. So what we need to do is we need to select some data. Don't worry about this chart data range right here. What we want to do is we want to go and hit this add button. Now the series name, we can go back and name this later, and I suggest that you do that. We're just going to tell it what we want as the x values and what we want as the y values. So first of all, for the x values, that's going to be our manipulated variable or time. We're going to highlight this whole column. For our y values, we want total distance as a function of total time, so we're going to highlight this column. And hopefully, we get a nice trend. So when we look at this graph right here, you guys, this looks like a beautiful trend. It looks like a continuous curve. It clearly isn't linear, but we do see this parabolic shape that we expect with the distance versus time graph for accelerated motion. But this is just our data. We don't know what this is. We don't know what this is. We should title it. So let's go through and actually do some of these things. For the most current version of Excel, we're going to want to add a chart element. Okay? For older versions, you may just see some different functions that you can do. But in here, we'll go add chart element, and let's do our axes first. So we're going to go to axes titles. Let's label our primary horizontal. We know that this is going to be total time elapsed. And our units are in seconds. Hit enter. Go back. Axes titles, primary vertical. We know that this is the total distance traveled. And mine are in millimeters, yours may be in centimeters. Okay, what actually happened here? I'm going to use the proper notation in how we label physics graphs. It's always essentially the y variable as a function of the x variable. So what I'm going to call this is total distance traveled as a function of total time. Now, this is the basic thing that we can use for every chart, but we actually want to put some context in here. What actually happened? What was traveling? So to finish this title, I'm going to say total distance traveled is a function of total time for an air puck traveling down an incline table. Now we actually have some context for what this is. Alright, I just clicked on this left button here to make this larger. Now a very important thing is that we actually want to put a function on this, a trend line, because we have this beautiful quadratic looking graph. So I'm going to go down to trend line here, and let's just always go to more trend line options. Now if you look, it automatically defaulted to putting a linear function on this, and it clearly is not linear. It'd be linear if it's uniform motion. We clearly have accelerated motion here. Okay, so we're going to put a different trend line on this. So I'm going to click on this trend line. Going to go to trend line options. And what a parabola is it's an order 2 or a degree 2 polynomial. So I'm going to click on this and look at that beautiful graph. Alright, it's almost perfect data. Now I always like to take my graphs and bring them back to the y-axis, and I like to extrapolate a little bit beyond it. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to bring it forward just 0.1 seconds. Extrapolate a little bit. I'm going to bring it backwards 0.3, or sorry, 0.3, as that should bring it back almost all the way to the y-axis. And we can see this curve here. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to figure out what the equation is for this parabola. Okay, so I'm gonna, oh, looks like my computer has frozen again. So let's see if we can fix this. I'm just gonna click on the trend line again. I'm gonna go to the options, and I'm gonna display the equation and the r squared value. Move this over here. Let's blow up the font a little bit, make it 14 font, and I'm always a big fan of Times New Roman, so. Of course it didn't apply it there, so let's do it again. Alright. Now, if you're in 20-1 or 20-2 right now, you'll have probably seen the general form of quadratic function. Y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay? What the r squared value is it says essentially how well does the data represent the trend line. A perfect correlation is a correlation of 1. So essentially we have about as good of data as possible. So this quadratic function perfectly represents our data. That doesn't often happen, but it looks like the Airtable worked really well. This is going to be a really important number to us. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bold it and maybe apply a color to it, because that's going to be a really important number to us, as you will find out later. Okay, so this is essentially how far I want you guys to get with your lab. If you have any questions, please ask me, and hopefully this was helpful in teaching you some basic Excel skills and how to do a graph.